Imagine clinging to an icy ledge at 71 degrees below zero, your life fading with every freezing breath. This isn't a movie, it was 76-year-old Galina's terrifying reality in the brutal wilderness of Yakutia. But just as hope vanished, a frantic neigh pierced the silence, changing everything. The cold in Oymyakon does not simply chill you, it hunts you. It is a living, breathing predator that waits for a single mistake, a loose button, or a moment of hesitation. On the morning of the 14th of January 2018, the thermometer outside Galina Petrovna's timber cabin read 62 degrees Celsius. For the rest of the world, this is an apocalypse. For Galina, a 76-year-old widow born and raised in the Sakha Republic, it was merely a Tuesday. Galina was not a woman who believed in retirement. Her face was a map of deep lines carved by decades of squinting against the blinding white sun of the tundra, and her hands were as rough as the bark of the larch trees that dotted the landscape. She lived alone, 5 miles from the nearest settlement of Tomtor. Her only company, a shaggy, stout Yakutian horse named Buran. Buran was not a pet. He was a survivor, a beast evolved over centuries to withstand temperatures that would snap steel. His coat was thick, like wool, his mane falling over his eyes in a chaotic mop of gray and white. Galina had raised him since he was a foal, bottle-feeding him when his mother died during a wolf attack. They spoke a language without words, a series of clicks, whistles, and the shifting of weight. "Easy, old friend," Galina murmured, her breath instantly turning to a cloud of ice crystals that settled on her fur hood. She was hitching Buran to the sled. They needed to check the fish trap set in the Indigirka River. It was a routine trip, one they had made 1,000 times. But the wilderness is never routine. As they moved away from the cabin, the silence of the taiga was absolute. The snow was packed hard, screaming under the runners of the sled, a high-pitched screech that only happens when the air is cold enough to freeze mercury. Galina sat bundled in layers of reindeer fur, her eyes scanning the horizon. The sky was a pale, washed-out violet, the sun a distant, heatless coin. About 2 miles out, the wind changed. In Yakutia, a shift in wind direction can drop the temperature by 10 degrees in minutes. The whisper of the stars, the sound of one's own breath freezing and falling like dust became a roar. A whiteout was descending, not with the violence of a storm, but with the insidious creep of a thick fog. "Ha, Buran, bistrai." "Faster," Galina urged, slapping the reins lightly. Buran tossed his head, his ears pinning back. He veered left, away from the river path. "No, Buran. Left is the ridge. We stay on the flat," Galina shouted, her voice muffled by her scarf. The horse resisted, whinnying in protest. Yakutian horses have an instinct for ice that humans lack. They can feel the hollows and fractures beneath the snow. Buran knew the river ice was unstable due to a thermal shift, but Galina, blinded by the sudden swirl of snow and confident in her decades of experience, pulled the reins hard to the right, forcing him back toward the riverbank. It was the mistake the cold had been waiting for. As they skirted the edge of a steep embankment known to locals as the Devil's Jaw, a sheer drop-off leading down to the rocky riverbed, the ground beneath the sled didn't just crack. It disintegrated. The snow had formed a cornice, a false ledge hanging over empty air. Buran felt the shift instantly. With a terrifying scream, he lunged forward, his hooves scrabbling for purchase on the permafrost, his immense strength dragging the front of the sled onto solid ground. But Galina was in the back. The rear of the sled swung out over the abyss like a pendulum. The momentum threw Galina sideways. She didn't scream. The cold stole the air from her lungs before she could. She tumbled out of the furs, grasping desperately at the smooth, polished ice of the cliff edge. She slid. 10 feet. 20. Her body slammed onto a narrow, protruding shelf of rock covered in ice, 30 feet down the cliff face. The impact knocked the wind out of her, cracking a rib with a sickening crunch. Above her, the whiteout swallowed the world. Below her, a 60-foot drop to the jagged ice of the river. She was alive. But in Yakutia, falling is often better than landing, because now, she was alone, injured, and the temperature was plummeting toward 71 degrees Celsius. Galina lay perfectly still for a moment, the pain in her side radiating like a hot poker, a stark contrast to the numbing freeze seeping through her reindeer parkas. She knew the rules of the North. Panic is death. Sweat is death. Slowly, agonizingly, she rolled onto her back. The ledge was no wider than a park bench, slick with rime ice. If she moved too much to the left, she would fall. If she tried to climb, she would slip. The cliff face above her was sheer, a wall of frozen granite and earth that offered no handholds. "Buran," she croaked. Her voice was weak, a pathetic sound against the howling wind. High above, over the lip of the cliff, she heard a sound that broke her heart, the frantic, thundering stomp of hooves. Buran had not run. Usually, when a sled crashes, a horse will bolt, driven by the instinct of flight. But Buran was pacing the edge of the cliff, back and forth, whinnying loudly. He knew. He knew she was down there. "Go home," Galina whispered, tears leaking from her eyes and freezing instantly on her cheeks. "Go to Tomtor. Go." She knew her only chance was if the horse ran back to the village. Someone might see him riderless, with the broken sled traces, and come looking. But Buran was loyal to a fault. He wouldn't leave her. Minutes turned into an hour. The cold began to do its work. At 40 degrees Celsius, exposed skin freezes in minutes. At 70 degrees Celsius, the cold bypasses the skin and attacks the core. Galina could feel her blood thickening, her heart laboring to pump the sludge through her veins. She began to hallucinate. She saw her late husband, Victor, standing on the air in front of her. He was young again, holding a fishing net. "Get up, Galia," he seemed to say. "The tea is getting cold." "I can't, Vitya," she mumbled, her eyelids heavy. "I'm so tired." Above her, the stomping stopped. Galina forced her eyes open. The silence was terrified her more than the wind. Had Buran left? Had he finally run for help? Or had he given up? Suddenly, a dark shape eclipsed the pale light above. Buran's massive head appeared over the rim of the cliff, 30 feet up. He was craning his neck down, looking directly at her. His nostrils flared, steaming like a dragon's. He let out a low, rumbling nicker, a sound he used to make when he wanted an apple from her pocket. "I have no apples, boy," Galina wept. "I have nothing." Then, the horse did something that made Galina question her sanity. He disappeared from the edge. A moment later, a shower of snow and dirt rained down on her. Then he appeared again. He was biting at something. The reins, the long, leather reins that were still attached to the broken harness on his back. He was trying to lower them? No, they weren't long enough. The drop was 30 feet. The reins were maybe 10. Buran seemed to realize this. He disappeared again. Galina closed her eyes. The pain in her rib was fading, replaced by a warm, fuzzy sensation. She knew what this was. Hypothermia's final trick. The body stops fighting, and the brain releases a flood of endorphins to make the dying pleasant. She was going to sleep. Crack. A loud sound echoed from above. Not the crack of ice, but the snap of wood. Galina looked up, fighting the heaviness of her eyelids. Buran was back at the edge, but he wasn't looking at her. He was fighting with something. He was dragging something heavy. The sound of wood scraping against permafrost grated through the air. He had the sled. The sled was still attached to him by the traces, but it was jammed or broken. But that wasn't it. He wasn't just dragging the sled. He was dragging the sled toward the edge. Is he crazy? Galina thought, a spark of fear piercing her stupor. If he drops the sled, it will crush me. No, Buran, back. She tried to scream, but it came out as a whisper. The horse ignored her. He was possessed. He turned his hindquarters toward the cliff, digging his hooves into the snow, and pushed. He was pushing the sled backward, over the lip of the precipice. Galina curled into a ball, covering her head, waiting for the impact that would kill her. The sled tipped. Gravity took hold. It slid over the edge, but it didn't fall. It stopped with a violent jerk, dangling 5 feet below the cliff edge, swaying in the wind. The leather traces held. Buran had anchored himself up top, using his own body weight as a counterbalance, but the sled was still 25 feet above Galina. It was useless. Galina stared up at the swaying wooden frame. It was a taunting pendulum of salvation, hopelessly out of reach. She looked at Buran's head, peering over the edge again. He looked at the sled, then at her, then at the sled. He seemed confused, frustrated. He pawed the ground, sending more snow down. He knew it wasn't enough. Galina's vision began to tunnel. The edges turned black. The cold had reached her marrow. She stopped shivering, a sign that her body had run out of energy to generate heat. I tried, old boy, she thought. You tried too. She drifted into the darkness. But Buran was not done. The Yakutian horse is a creature of the herd, possessing a problem-solving intelligence that few give them credit for. He disappeared from the edge one more time. And then, the unbelievable happened. Galina heard a strange sound, a rhythmic thump-drag. Thump-drag. She forced her eyes open one last time. Something was coming down the cliff face. Not the sled. Not a rope. It was a tree. The tree was not a majestic pine. In the stunted, frozen hell of the Oymyakon Valley, trees are twisted, skeletal things, Dahurian larches that grow agonizingly slowly, their wood as hard as iron. This one was a deadfall, a dry gray trunk about 15 feet long, its roots ripped from the shallow permafrost years ago, likely by a storm. It had been lying near the cliff edge, frozen into the ground until Buran's desperate thrashing and the dragging of the sled had dislodged it. Caught in the tangled mess of the leather traces and the broken sled runners, the log slid over the precipice, crashing against the cliff face with a sound like a gunshot. It swung wildly in the wind, battering against the ice wall, sending showers of razor-sharp shards raining down on Galina. The tip of the dead larch swung within 3 feet of her ledge. Galina stared at it through the fog of her dying consciousness. To her, it didn't look like a log. In the delirium of hypothermia, the knobbly branches looked like the outstretched arms of her ancestors. Grab it, Gallia, the wind seemed to whisper. She tried to move her arm. It felt like lifting a lead bar. Her heavy sheepskin mittens were coated in ice, making them slick and clumsy. Her fingers inside were numb, devoid of sensation. She didn't know if she was making a fist or if her hand was open. The log swayed closer, then swung away. I can't, she thought, tears freezing her eyelashes shut. I'm already dead. But above her, Buran screamed. It wasn't the panic of a prey animal. It was a demand. The horse began to stomp rhythmically, shaking the ground, sending vibrations down the taut leather straps. The vibration traveled down the sled, through the log, and hummed in the air near Galina's head. The sound pierced her stupor. That horse. That stubborn, foolish horse. He hadn't run. He hadn't frozen. He was fighting. A surge of something primal, not hope, but anger ignited in Galina's chest. She was a daughter of Yakutia. Her people had survived Stalin, famines, and winters that cracked stone. Was she going to die here, just 5 miles from home, while her horse did all the work? No, she rasped. She waited. She watched the pendulum swing of the log. 1, 2, now. Galina lunged. It was a pathetic, clumsy motion. She didn't stand. She simply rolled her upper body off the safety of the ledge, throwing her arms out into the abyss. Her chest slammed into the rough bark of the larch. The air was knocked out of her again. She slipped. The wood was iced over, frictionless. She slid down the trunk, her legs dangling over the 60-foot drop to the river. No, she screamed, the adrenaline finally hitting her bloodstream. She jammed her right arm through a fork in the dead branches, locking her elbow. Her body jolted to a halt. She was hanging by one arm, suspended over the void, attached to a swinging log that was attached to a broken sled, which was attached to a horse. The weight shift was immediate. 30 feet above, Buran felt the sudden drag. A lesser horse would have been pulled over. The sudden add of 60 kilograms of dead weight on a slippery cliff edge is a death sentence. But Buran was a Yakut horse. His center of gravity was low. His legs, thick pillars of muscle, He didn't panic. He dropped his haunches, digging his back hooves into the permafrost, turning himself into a living anchor. Galina gasped, the pain in her arm excruciating as blood tried to force its way back into frozen capillaries. She was dangling, but she wasn't safe. She couldn't climb this. Her legs were useless, unresponsive blocks of wood. She couldn't pull herself up 30 feet of swaying junk. She looked up. The sled was wedged against a rock outcropping 5 feet below the lip of the cliff. The traces were taut, singing with tension. "Buran!" she screamed, pouring every ounce of her remaining life into the name. "Pull!" Buran heard her. He didn't need the command. The resistance on the line told him everything. The load was heavy, but it was alive. He leaned forward. The leather creaked. The log jerked upward 6 inches. Galina swung wildly, smashing her shoulder against the cliff face. She bit her tongue, tasting copper warmth, but she held on. She wrapped her other arm around the branch, locking her hands together in a death grip. Buran pulled again. Another foot. Then, disaster. The sled, which had been acting as a pivot point, groaned. The rock it was wedged against cracked under the pressure. With a terrifying lurch, the sled broke free from the outcrop. Galina fell. She dropped 5 feet in a heartbeat, the log plummeting with her. She screamed, eyes squeezed shut, waiting for the traces to snap. They didn't. The fall stopped with a bone-jarring yank that nearly dislocated her shoulders. Buran had slid 3 feet toward the edge but had caught the weight again. He was now dangerously close to the drop. He snorted, white plumes of breath exploding from his nostrils, his iron shoes sparking against hidden stones under the snow. He was fighting gravity, fighting the ice, fighting death itself, slowly, agonizingly. The ascent began. It wasn't a smooth hoist. It was a series of violent, jerking heaves. Heave. Pause. Heave. Pause. Galina was dragged up the cliff face. Her body battered against the jagged rocks. Her parkas tore. Her face was scraped raw. But she didn't let go. She focused entirely on the rough bark pressing against her cheek. 10 feet. 20 feet. She saw the underside of the sled. Then she was being dragged over the sled. And then, the lip of the cliff. Buran gave a final, mighty lunge, throwing his entire body weight forward. Galina was hauled over the edge like a sack of frozen fish, the log clattering behind her. She slid 10 feet across the snow and came to a stop. She was on flat ground. She was out of the devil's jaw, but the temperature was now 72 degrees Celsius, and Galina Petrovna could no longer move. The silence returned, heavier than before. Galina lay face down in the snow. Her mind was a fading ember. She knew she was on solid ground, but her body had nothing left to give. The shivering had stopped completely, the final stage before the heart stops. The sweet sleep was calling her again, promising an end to the pain in her frozen limbs. Just close your eyes, Galya. Just for a minute. She felt a heavy impact next to her. The crunch of snow. Hot, wet air blasted against her ear. Rough whiskers brushed her cheek. Buran. He nudged her violently with his muzzle. Get up. I can't, she whispered into the snow. Buran nudged her again, harder, nearly rolling her over. He nipped at her shoulder, his teeth pinching through the thick fur of her coat. He was frantic. He knew that stillness meant death. When she didn't rise, the horse did something that defies the instincts of his species. In the wild, a horse standing is safe. A horse lying down is vulnerable to wolves. But Buran looked at the small, broken woman who had fed him from a bottle, who had sung to him in the dark winters. He buckled his front knees, then his back legs. The massive, half-ton animal collapsed into the snow, pressing his body along the entire length of hers. He curled his neck over her, effectively burying her under his heat. A Yakut horse is a furnace. Their metabolism is designed to keep them alive at 70 degrees Celsius. Their thick skin and layers of fat radiate a dry, intense heat. Buran became a living blanket. Galina felt the weight, the crushing pressure of his chest against her back. But then she felt it. The heat. It seeped through her torn parka, through her frozen layers, reaching out to her dying core. It was slow, painful, thawing the blood that had turned to slush. She drifted in and out of consciousness, wrapped in the smell of horse sweat, hay, and snow. She didn't know how long they lay there. It could have been an hour. It could have been 6. Buran never moved. He shivered occasionally, violent tremors that shook them both, generating kinetic heat to share with her. He was burning his own reserves, starving himself of warmth to keep the small human alive. "Look, over there, by the ridge." The voice was distant, muffled by the wind. "Is that a bear?" "No, it's a horse." Galina heard the roar of an engine, the unmistakable, grinding whine of a UAZ 452. Bukhanka, the loaf-shaped Soviet van that is the only vehicle capable of navigating the Yakutian tundra in winter. Doors slammed. Footsteps crunched rapidly through the snow. Galina Petrovna. Strong hands were pulling Buran away. The horse resisted, groaning, stiff from the cold and his vigil. "Careful, careful. She's blue. Vasily, get the blankets. Get the heat running." It was Igor Dyakonov, the mechanic from Tomtor. He had seen the empty corral that morning, the missing sled. He knew Galina never stayed out past noon. He had gathered 2 other men, Vasily and Pyotr, and driven into the whiteout, following the faint tracks before the wind erased them. They found the scene of a miracle. The broken edge of the cliff, the shattered sled traces, the exhausted horse, and the woman curled in the embryonic shape of survival. They lifted Galina. She was stiff, her face a mask of frost. Igor pressed his ear to her chest. "She's faint," he shouted, his voice cracking. "But a heartbeat. It's there. Drive, Vasily. Drive like the devil is chasing you." The recovery was not a fairy tale. Frostbite does not forgive. Galina spent 3 weeks in the intensive care unit in Yakutsk, 900 kilometers away. The doctors, hardened men and women who had seen the worst of the cold, shook their heads in disbelief. Her core temperature was 28 degrees, Dr. Ivanov told Egor later. By all medical science, she should be dead. Her heart should have stopped hours before you found her. It wasn't medical science, Igor replied, twisting his fur cap in his hands. It was the horse. Galina lost 2 toes on her left foot and the tip of her right pinky finger. Her face bore the dark, peeling scars of severe frostbite for a year. But she kept her life. When she finally returned to her cabin in Tomtor, spring was breaking. The temperature had risen to a balmy 20 degrees Celsius. She was frail, walking with a cane, but her eyes were bright. She didn't go into her house. She went straight to the corral. Buran was there, chewing on a pile of hay. He looked up as she approached. He didn't whinny. He didn't run to her. He simply watched her, his dark eyes calm and ancient. Galina limped to the fence. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a bright red apple, an extravagant luxury in Yakutia, flown in from thousands of miles away. She held it out. Buran took it gently, the crunch echoing in the crisp air. He chewed, lowered his head, and exhaled a warm cloud of breath into her cupped hands. Galina buried her face in his mane, weeping softly into the coarse gray hair. She saw the scars on his chest where the harness had dug in. She saw the chipped front tooth he had broken dragging the log. They stood there for a long time, the old woman and the beast, the only 2 souls who knew what had really happened on the edge of the world, where the cold takes everything, but love, sometimes, refuses to let go. Galina Petrovna lived another 6 years in the frozen heart of Yakutia, never again leaving Buran's side. Her survival remains a medical anomaly, but to the people of the Sakha Republic, it is a testament to the unbreakable bond between the Yakut people and their horses. It reminds us that in the deepest freeze, intelligence and loyalty can burn hotter than fire. If this story of survival froze you to your core, please hit that like button. It helps us share more incredible true stories. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a journey into the wild. Share this video with someone you'd trust to pull you off a cliff. Stay warm, stay safe, and see you in the next one.